Many times I'm asked, what are the state's housing policies in Vermont? And to answer that question, we'd have to look in lots of different policy documents and read through the lines to see what's mentioned and what's left off. To give a high-level overview, I'm going to go through it with the simple who, what, when, where, why, how type approach. So, who? Who is prioritized in the state's housing funding and policy decision making? For the most part, most housing funding and policies support the lowest income households, and that includes households who are homeless. And so most housing resources are targeted to the lowest income, as well as those who are the most housing insecure, meaning people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. Therefore, a lot of the housing policies in the state are rental housing focused, because if we think about the continuum of housing, we know that people often move from being homeless to being a renter to hopefully eventual homeownership. Now, what's the housing policy? In many ways, permanent affordability underlies most of our housing policies. If there are limited public resources, of which there are never enough, we want to make sure that we are not reinvesting in housing every 10, 20 years, and instead we want those public investments to stay in those properties so that affordable housing can be offered for generations. And so permanent affordability, meaning that there's no expiration on the affordability restrictions for residents, is really a top priority of our state. And this has been proven to be very effective, as many federal programs historically were created with 10, 20, or maybe 30-year affordability limits. But now that those programs have been around for 30 or more years, nationally, we are seeing lots of affordable housing properties in wonderfully invested communities now sadly convert to market rate housing, and those public subsidies that made the affordable housing are lost. And so residents are being displaced, and communities, while paying for new affordable housing year after year, are actually just only staying level and not getting ahead on their housing needs because they are both losing units every year while trying to make up and add more. Another what in terms of housing policy is energy efficiency. We know that affordable housing is not just the upfront construction costs, but it's also that housing is affordable over the long-term operation of that housing. And so energy efficiency not only meets the state's important climate goals in trying to reduce our carbon usage, but additionally, it helps affordability because energy efficient homes cost less to maintain and operate over time. So that helps on many regards. Now, who, what, when? When is now. Now we need affordable housing. The need is great. There are so many cost-burdened Vermonters, especially renters, but also homeowners, and we are not keeping up with the development needs in our state. There is a long history of Vermont not creating and constructing enough housing and at any price point, and therefore that lack of housing development is impacting the supply, and the demand continues to grow. And so when we need affordable housing is yesterday, if not today, and for the future. Where do we need affordable housing? We need it in designated areas. Vermont has been fantastic at limiting its growth to certain downtown and village center communities, areas identified as new town centers or new growth opportunities, where we want to make sure that we're concentrating development in a core area so that we can preserve the rural countryside and the working lands for other uses. This helps the residents in those communities because they have more walkable areas so that they can work and shop and get their healthcare and educational needs met all within a core center of town. And so this has really helped to preserve Vermont's landscape while also providing the housing that's needed downtown. Why? There are so many whys. Housing intersects with every discipline out there. Right now, there's a lot of focus on racial equity. Why we need affordable housing is because households of color are more likely to be young and more likely to be lower income than white households. And therefore, racial equity can be achieved through providing more affordable housing, and that could bring communities that much farther. We also need affordable housing for community development, to build up our vital communities across the state, not just in one county or another, but everywhere, so that communities are invested in. Through economic development, we need affordable housing to support our jobs. We need to know that both jobs and housing are going together in communities so that residents don't have long commutes and that we're supporting communities in their economic development needs. There is a lot of research around the health outcomes and how affordable housing can be a vaccine to many other costly health interventions, and that by providing affordable housing can really stave off a lot of other public expenses when it comes to healthcare. There are tremendous educational outcomes for children, climate impacts, and so on and so forth, of where smart, affordable, safe, decent housing is placed in the right spot with the right host of other elements around it that can really support Vermont everywhere. And so how we do this is through the funding of state and federal partners, as well as local communities setting up to make sure that investments are made in affordable housing. In the US, we have chosen as a federal policy that really most of the dollars are going to go toward the support and the creation of affordable rental housing. And instead, homeownership is made affordable through financial tools like a mortgage interest deduction and being able to write off property taxes on one's taxes. These financial tools are helpful in making housing more affordable for homeowners. In addition, there is the support for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the creation and support of a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. By knowing what a housing payment will be over a stable 30-year time period, it makes housing more affordable as incomes hopefully grow, as well as creates stability so households know what their housing costs will be over time. These are somewhat complex financial structures that do help make homeownership more affordable. There is a lot of discussion about how there needs to be more support to create affordable homeownership homes, like through a building program that would support modest income Vermonters in having more starter homes and homes that are affordable to more Vermonters available to purchase. But currently, a lot of our investments are dedicated toward creating rental housing to serve those who are the lowest income and or set aside units for people who are homeless. And so there are so many documents and layers to this that we can continue to peel back. Some of the primary policy documents where you can read more about the state's housing priorities are through the state's Consolidated Plan that the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development organizes. HUD requires that states and certain localities, in Vermont it's limited to Burlington, that the state and Burlington must write consolidated plans that pull together and is a lot of housing policies and becomes the master housing policy document for the state. That plan also influences other funding documents that determine where money goes, including VHFA's Qualified Allocation Plan. The QAP governs how federal tax credits are administered, and that needs to be in alignment with the state's Consolidated Plan. There are also Public Housing Authority plans, PHA plans, that talk about how and where vouchers and Section 8 resources and PHA resources are being dedicated, and those need to be in alignment with the CON plan. There's also state statute where the Vermont legislature has determined what housing policies and priorities there are through the creation of the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund, as well as through planning and zoning requirements that municipalities and localities have to abide by. All of these documents together create what is Vermont's housing priorities and policies. And in many ways, they work seamlessly together to reinforce the messages of each other, to know that we are serving the lowest income households with a centering on people experiencing homelessness, that we prioritize permanent affordability as well as energy efficiency in smart growth downtown areas to make sure that we are making the kind of investments that will serve the state's residents for many decades to come.